Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Tevis-Finn, recording from room 114. Welcome to the Progressive Era Part 2, and we'll be talking about democratic reforms, the temperance movement, and workers' rights. So on your guided notes, let's look at the first section, democratic. So I want you guys to think back to the earlier screencast that showed you the devastation in Galveston, Texas. And so after that, Wisconsin's Republican governor, Robert M. La Follette, his nickname you guys can fill in was Fighting Bob. He led the fight to make government more accountable to its citizens and to increase accessibility. He's shown here addressing his constituents, very persuasive and charismatic. He changed the way candidates were nominated. Okay, you guys can fill that in. He found that there was a lot of bribery and backdoor handling to select convention delegates. Now, I put down in bold to let's review because I think you guys probably need to look back and make sure you understand the process for delegates. Before Fighting Bob, delegates were hand-picked to represent their district, and then they voted on which candidate would go to the final election. So my example for you guys is Stuco. In order to finalize the group of students to be eligible for election, a group of delegates from each grade would only get to vote, and hopefully their vote would represent whom the class wanted. And then from that pool, the whole grade would vote on the finalist. So you guys should see how there is a very complicated undercurrent here, and there's lots of room for favorites and popularity contests. So this new law requires parties to hold, you guys can fill in, a direct primary where all party members could vote for a candidate to run in the general election. His state, I put here guys in quotes, you can fill in, is called a laboratory for democracy. His goal was to keep his citizens informed because he believed ignorance led to corruption. So there's 4 more reforms, so he really is a catalyst for the democratic reform area in the progressive time. So let's look at what comes after Bob. So the first bullet, guys, says initiative, and it was where a group of citizens would be permitted to introduce legislation and then requiring legislators to vote on it. I have there a picture of signatures. So you guys will sometimes see that in town where people go door to door, and then once they get enough names, they can bring it to their representative. Okay, the next one's a little different. Referendum. So it allows citizens to actually vote on the laws directly without going to the legislators. So the modern day example there is of same-sex marriage, but this really put government into the hands of everyday voters. Same kind of power, guys, is found in the recall. It provided voters the option to have a special election to actually remove an elected official from office before the end of their term. So here's a modern day example in Wisconsin. You can see both sides standing with and trying to remove Scott Walker. So this certainly is like power to the people. And here's the Constitution, we the people. Guys, originally, you guys can fill in, the Constitution ruled that each state legislature would elect the 2 senators. This should sound like favorites again, right? So once elected, they repaid their supporters with special deals and favors. So the progressives went right after this kind of corruption. By 1913, pictured, guys, is the Direct Election Amendment, and it became the 17th Amendment to our Constitution. This picture should tell you that we're in a new area of reform. Look at how serious these ladies are. Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. So guys, this is moral and social. Okay, so temperance, you guys should know, is the banning of alcohol on moral principles. And it was led by Carrie A. Nation. She's a famous teetotaler. So guys, a teetotaler, abstained from alcohol. In 1881, Kansas, which was her state, became the first to outlaw alcohol. So guys, remember how I said in the first screencast that progressive reform starts at the state level and then goes nationwide. And let me ask you, if Kansas is the first state, does our country eventually nationally make alcohol illegal? If you can answer that question, then you're all ready for the next unit. And here she is. Can you imagine her coming to your door? If you were a saloon owner, I'd be pretty scared. So guys, she went to saloons with her hatchet, pictured there, to destroy the bottles of liquor. She really thought they were evil. Her famous quote, you guys can fill in, as she would say to the bartenders as she would walk in. She was very tall, by the way. She would say, "Good morning, destroyer of men's souls." So she certainly got her point across. She actually was arrested. So if temperance falls under kind of moral reform, this would be social reform. So the settlement houses were social welfare progressives created charities to help the poor, and they advocated for social reforms such as laws that would address the needs of the poor, like child care and education. So Jane Addams is the most well-known for her Hull House, which was a settlement house in Chicago, pictured here on the right. Next, I want you to fill in social Darwinism. So this movement of the settlement houses for the poor was inspired by social Darwinism, a theory of survival of the fittest. So we're going from Darwin, and now I want you to think about society, not biology, and that there is a reason for those that are disadvantaged. Maybe they're lacking in some way that makes them stay at the bottom of society. And so progressives targeted them. Here's a picture of the daycare provided for the immigrant poor. And a whole new section of reform is child labor. You guys should definitely know it's the most emotional issue of all the problems. It really tugs at your heart. It was uncovered by muckraker John Spargo from the previous screencast. And his 1906 book was titled The Bitter Cry of the Children. It told of coal mines hiring thousands of 9 to 10-year-old breaker boys. Fill in their job, guys. It was to separate slag out of coal. Slag is the part of coal that you don't use, and that's what they did, paying them 60 cents for a 10-hour day. It damaged, let's show some of the boys here, right? It damaged and crippled their backs and hands. Okay, so this, can you imagine what this would do to your spine, to your lungs, your hands? His work convinced states to pass minimum age laws and maximum hours that children could work. So as emotional as this cause was, it did not abolish child labor, as it was ingrained in our culture. Right? Families relied on their children to help out, in farms, and now so did factories and mines. But at least someone was paying attention. And the last area of reform, guys, is for workers, adult workers, right? Health and safety codes. So you guys can fill in that there was no workman's comp. So if you're hurt on the job, you would not receive help with medical bills. So progressives joined union leaders to pressure states to pass workman's comp laws, and they established, you guys can fill in, insurance funds that employers financed, and then workers would receive payments from if injured on the job. Note that this is from Wisconsin, which remember is the laboratory of democracy with Fighting Bob. And note the time, 1911. So I have a question for you. Is, can employers, do they have the right to regulate hours, or is that the government's job? So 2 different court cases give us 2 different answers. So the 2 Supreme Court cases, the first one I'll do is Lochner versus New York. And a New York law, guys, ruled it unconstitutional, you can fill in, so unconstitutional that forbid bakers from working more than a 10-hour day. So it did not help the worker, it helped the employer, guys. It said the states could not interfere with the liberty of employers, right, like their 14th Amendment, meaning that they could make their bakers work as long as they wanted. So he looks pretty exhausted, and here's their conditions of work. So it's definitely siding with the employers and talking about upholding the 14th Amendment. So workers, you do not get protected. Mueller versus Oregon is pictured here, a whole different environment. It's for women. And guys, you can fill in the bullet that it upheld the state's right to regulate hours of employment. And it was based on gender differences, arguing that healthy mothers were the state's concern, and this did not violate the employer's rights, like the 14th, to run their business however they wanted. So here's the laundry, where they saw that it was the state's job to protect the workers because they were mothers and they had to take care of children. It definitely is, gender biased. And here's some of the ruling language that came out in 1908. So it reversed Lochner, and this laundry business in Oregon was fined, right, for going over the state law of the workday hours. And so the court did not agree on the side with which Lochner had. It instead ruled that the labor laws were constitutional. States could set labor laws that affected employment contracts. All right, I found a good cartoon that should now make sense because of what we're watching in class. New York City, 1911, triangle shirtwaist. So what are zoning laws? They are meant, you guys can see from some of the pictures, to protect the public. And they properly divide up a city into commercial and residential districts. Imagine you're trying to plan out a development, and so if it's for housing, you have to make sure it's up to code for residential, and if you're trying to make a new restaurant in downtown Medfield near Starbucks, it needs to be up to commercial code. So this decided how the land and buildings were to be used and established building codes for minimum standards for light, air, room size, and sanitation, and required fire escapes. This was, of course, in reaction to the devastating Triangle Fire, when women had to jump from the 9th floor because the only fire escape had broke and the other exit was kept locked. Remember, they were worried about theft. So police and fire departments were helpless, and the city even held a public morgue for family members to identify their loved ones. Did these women and girls die in vain? We'll see their footage for the Triangle Fire film, but laws were passed in response to this tragedy. This is Mrs. Tevis-Finn signing off.